we're very comfortable about who we are, and we can beat anybody, anywhere, at any time, playing the way we play. Now, some people might not like it. Hey, sorry.
Sorry. Welcome to SI Now. I'm Robin Lundberg here with Ryan Aselta. And Ryan, it seems Mike D'Antoni is feeling vindicated after the Rockets blew out the Warriors to even the Western Conference Finals a game apiece.
Yeah, he sure does look good after that Game 1 loss. It looks like Mike D'Antoni knew exactly what he was doing by sticking to his guns, so to speak, here with this team. He didn't make wholesale changes. He didn't overreact like the people who said this series was over after Game 1. He stuck to what this team does well. They played iso ball, but they shared the ball with a heavy dose of passing. And let's face it, Robin, when you've got Tucker, Ariza, Gordon shooting 70% from the floor combined for 68 points, this is a very tough team to beat when you've got to also deal with James Harden and Chris Paul.
Yeah, I'm thrilled the Rockets won the way they did. And it's not because I necessarily think it's a series now. It's because the referendum on them was ridiculous after Game 1. You know, this binary culture we live in where it's championship or bust, and then you're thrown out. I mean, I think that's part of the reason Kevin Durant went to Golden State, right? Because it's the ring or there's nothing. And the idea that the Rockets would have been some sort of failure or bad team because they couldn't beat the Warriors was ridiculous considering what this Houston team has accomplished this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned Durant. D'Antoni knew what he was saying. He said after Game 1 he wasn't concerned because KD is going to get what he gets. Well, he got it again last night. The Rockets dealt with everything else, and they were in good shape. How about the Warriors, though, now? Series tied at a game apiece, heading back to Golden State. Any concerns if you're a Golden State right now?
I still think the Warriors are going to win this series, but if I'm constructing concerns, I go with 3. Number 1, Kevin Durant is scoring too much right now. The Warriors are 1-6 in his top 7 scoring games this year. Now, there are some other ones where he got close to those numbers and they still won. So it's not like a rule. The problem is, though, they're not the Rockets. They're not the Cavs. They're not built to watch one guy do everything, and that takes away some of the other things they do well. Curry doesn't have the ball in his hands, and Durant's not doing anything else but scoring. He only has 1 assist and 6 rebounds for the series. Number 2, Steph Curry's not playing particularly well. And in fact, in this postseason, he already has more games with 1 or fewer threes than he had in the other 3 previous postseasons combined. And then finally, Andre Iguodala looks afraid to shoot right now. And I wonder maybe if we underestimated his age catching up to him a little bit. So if I'm constructing the concern for the Warriors, those are my points.
That construction gives me concern, especially with Steph. 2 of 13 from three-point land. Steve Kerr has to come up with a game plan to get Steph involved for Game 3. Now, for more on the Rockets' Game 2 win, plus a look ahead to Game 3 between the Celtics and Cavs, our Sports Illustrated NBA analyst John Stark stopped by for our Shot Clock segment. All right, fellas, you know how this works. 24 seconds to make your point. John, we're going to start with you. After the Rockets evened up the Western Conference Finals, we make the statement, the Warriors have become too reliant on Kevin Durant. 24 seconds is up. Go ahead.
Disagree. You definitely had to have him scoring, but I think Clay and Steph just had to get themselves going. The Rockets upped the ante in game number 2, and they seem to not play the way they're capable of playing. But I think that you had to have some guy step up to the plate, and Durant is the guy because you can't stop him.
All right, Robin, I know you've been hammering this point. We saw it earlier. I know you got a little more to add. 24 seconds for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do think they're too reliant on Kevin Durant. And let's remember what the Warriors were. Before he got there, they won 73 games. In times he's missed, they've still scored at a very high clip. Obviously, they're a better team with Durant, but you still want to maintain the elements of what made the Warriors what they are and not revert to what Oklahoma City was, where it was Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. You want the best of both worlds, that dynamic, explosive offense with the killer in isolation.
I'm trying to follow you, but Kevin Durant's scoring is a good thing for me, no matter if it's 30, 40, 50 points. I'm kind of siding with John here. All right, Steph Curry, just 2 of 13 from three-point range in this series so far. Robin, Curry's knee injury is an excuse for his performance. 24 seconds. Go ahead.
An excuse seems a little strong. I don't want to excuse any performances. He's out there playing. He needs to play at a high level. We're talking about a guy who is a super duper star and hasn't necessarily had those huge games in the playoffs yet to meet up with that. But it is a factor. I don't want to dismiss it. You know, I'm not this like rah tough guy. You have a knee injury. You go out there playing NBA professional basketball, especially when you have to cut and move the way he does. It can have an impact on your performance.
Curry has said, John, that it's not an issue. He's playing the tough guy role, 24 seconds. Is it a factor?
I agree with him 100%. I played in the NBA Finals coming off a meniscus tear, and I didn't use that as an excuse. If he's going to go out there and play the way he's capable of playing, he just has to toughen it up, and I think he's going to do that. You know, his father obviously played in the NBA, so they know you can play with Knicks and Knacks all series long, but I think he's going to be all right next game once he figure out that, hey, I got to be more aggressive and not let their defense get to me.
I don't know. Subconsciously, I think it's playing a role a little bit, whether it's mobility or just in his mind.
I've got a torn labrum right now. Am I doing okay?
You were fighting through, and you said it's not a factor, so I'm going with you there. All right, now the NBA announced the finalists for the MVP award. James Harden, LeBron James, Anthony Davis are the finalists. John, Harden is the clear-cut MVP, 24 seconds. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say he's the clear-cut MVP. I think he didn't have an MVP year. I think that he's been playing the Cinderella role for so many years, and now people feel like they have to give it to him. I'm surprised that they don't have Westbrook. The guy come back and back up his triple-double. Steph Curry and Steve Nash come back and back their years up. He did it with a triple-double. These guys did it with scoring. Nash did it with assists, and so I'm not sure.
All right, Robin, 24 seconds. Is Harden the NBA's MVP this year?
No, he's not. As I always say, LeBron James is the MVP every year, especially this year. How much clearer does it need to be through this playoffs that no team is relying on one player for more value than the Cleveland Cavaliers are on LeBron James? Last night, James Harden went 9 of 24 from the floor, and they blew out the Warriors. LeBron James goes 9 of 24 from the floor, and the Cavs are getting blown out whoever they play.
Here's the thing, John. This is something we side on. LeBron is the MVP until further notice, though I think Harden has already locked up the award from the voters here. All right, last thing. Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals is Saturday night in Cleveland. Robin, the Celtics, they're up 2-0. This series is over. 24 seconds. Go ahead.
No, the series isn't over. At this point, I'd be picking the Boston Celtics. They're definitely the better team, top to bottom. But we just talked about LeBron James. The Cavs are going home. I'm still going to give him at least a puncher's chance in this series, considering Boston is still green. They haven't played as well on the road. And if all of a sudden you get back to Boston 2-2, the pressure switches to the Celtics.
Nice pun there, huh? Celtics are green? They've been green for a long time, Robin. I got news for you. 24 seconds, John. Is this series over?
I agree with Robin. It's not over with. Obviously, you know, the series don't start until somebody wins on the other opponent's home court. So I think that they're going to come back, at least get one game, just because of LeBron greatness. They could get one game. But for all intended purposes, I think that the Celtics is probably going to end this back in Boston.
I kind of disagree, both you guys. I don't think you count out the king until he is dead and buried. I think they're very much alive. John Starks, thanks for being with us.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, Michigan State University has agreed to a $500 million settlement with the hundreds of victims of sexual abuse at the hands of Larry Nassar. For more on this, let's welcome in SI legal expert Michael McCann. And Michael, the $500 million is the largest amount ever paid in a sexual abuse case involving an American university, dwarfing the settlement reached by Penn State in the Jerry Sandusky case. $500 million. How did both sides come to this size settlement?
Well, I think the number has significance on a number of levels. One is that it has to be enough money to pay for not only the current set of victims, but also future claimants, other people who will say that they were abused by Larry Nassar and that Michigan State was responsible. So it has to be a significant enough monetary figure to cover not only who's known today, but who will be known down the line. And I also think $500 million is significant just because of the way it sounds, right? It's so much money, $500 million. I think it clearly is sending a message that this was just heinous what happened with Larry Nassar, and that the university is really showing that it's I guess you could say owning up to not firing Larry Nassar, not supervising him, permitting him to act in the way he did. So I think the number has significance on those different levels.
Now, the victims have other lawsuits open against USA Gymnastics, the USOC, among others. How does this settlement affect those cases?
Well, this settlement removes Michigan State from the litigation, but that's really all it does. Those cases continue, and I assume that they will also end in settlements, but those cases will continue. Those defendants haven't yet resolved the claims against them, and as time goes on, more evidence and witness testimony will take place. But I think that the fact that Michigan State is settling will likely increase the odds that the others settle as well.
Obviously, no amount of money will be big enough to totally undo the damage that's been done here. Was this the best case scenario for both victims and the university, or did Michigan State get the better deal here?
Well, I think it provides, at least in regards to Michigan State, it provides some degree of closure for this legal challenge that the university can now move on and learn from its mistakes and make sure something like this never happens again. And maybe more importantly, other schools get the same message that they're going to end up paying massive money in a settlement if they permit something like this to happen as well. I don't think Michigan State's getting off easy. I think that, had the university gone the litigation route, it did have some defenses that may or may not have worked, and they could have extended the clock, if you will. So to the extent that the victims wanted recovery soon, this was really the only way to do it. Had the case continued and gone to trial, and then there would be an appeal, it may have been years for closure.
All right, let's shift gears here. We're now a couple of days removed from the landmark ruling on sports gambling. In New Jersey, Monmouth Park Racetrack says they're going to be ready to launch sports betting Memorial Day weekend. Will the legislation and framework be in place for sports books to open up this quickly?
That may be a bit fast. It sounds like there's some hesitation that just the timeline doesn't work that quickly. And this is part of a larger issue that the Supreme Court's decision, I think, was met with the expectation that there would be immediate opportunities to bet on sports. But even in a state like New Jersey, which is ahead of every other state for this issue, it too may struggle to get sports betting available as quickly as everyone wants. It's state government. I mean, nothing moves fast, and there are licensing issues. There are verification issues that have to take place. So this is a bit of a sign, I think, to those in other states that they expect that their own state legislative body will move quickly. It won't happen that fast, and we're talking months or years in some cases for states. I think New Jersey will get sports wagering soon. Memorial Day is pretty fast. Maybe they can do it, but that's fast.
How about the leagues, Michael? They feel the way to monetize sports gaming is going to come with that 1% integrity fee they plan on imposing, though a state congressman a few days ago said that the leagues are sorely mistaken and that the states have no plans on paying leagues like the NFL and NBA. How do you see this thing playing out?
Well, it could play out, Ryan, in a way in which the states openly oppose, in which the leagues openly oppose state legislative efforts to authorize sports betting. And the significance of that is that those leagues could conceivably pursue other lawsuits over this matter. They could turn to state law and say that sports betting is illegal in a certain state because of various restrictions. So they could, they have some leverage here. They could be disruptive if they're not getting their integrity fees. And again, this gets to the idea that this is not as fast moving as many would want.
Yeah, things could get messy and could slow things down quite a bit. Michael McCann, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm here with the sports editor for The Nation, host of the Edge of Sports podcast, and author of the new book, Jim Brown, Last Man Standing, Dave ZIRIN. And Dave, I don't think a lot of people in a younger generation, even myself included, quite understand everything about Jim Brown, other than him being this great football player. But, he had these Hollywood aspirations. He was very socially active. There are abuse allegations.
It's an amazing story, top to bottom. I think Jim Brown is one of the most fascinating figures in American life in the last 60 years. And there's only been one other biography ever even written about him. And you compare that, for example, to biographies about Muhammad Ali, where there is just a laundry list of writings, as there should be, because Ali is that fascinating a figure. But I think Jim Brown is in some respects even more fascinating of a figure because Jim Brown has never really left the fray. So as you mentioned, he was this great all-time football player, arguably the best to ever play. His statistics are Babe Ruthian compared to the people he was playing against. But then you also have these periods in the 1960s where he was on the leading edge of the political movements that were taking place. He started these organizations called the Black Economic Unions that were ahead of their time. And then he goes into Hollywood where he had aspirations of being, as they put it, the Black John Wayne. Then he was very involved in the gang truces in Los Angeles in the 1980s through today, through the American organization. And throughout this entire period, you have these allegations also of domestic abuse and violence against women, which I think in these days of Time's Up and Me Too, we're taking a fresh look at people throughout the last 50, 60 years. And so I found it irresistible as a topic to go through the life of Jim Brown.
Yeah, and I like that it was an honest approach. It wasn't, a fluff piece or anything like that. And there are a lot of interesting anecdotes within that. I want to touch on a few. Like, I'm sure most people don't realize that Richard Pryor and Jim Brown feuded over Prince.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Jim Brown was ahead of his time in that he attempted with Richard Pryor to start a black film studio called Indigo Pictures that attempted to develop talent, not just in front of the cameras, but behind the cameras. And one of the projects that they could have filmed was Purple Rain. But Jim Brown's insistence with Purple Rain was that it developed black talent in front and behind the cameras, and that was something that Richard Pryor was not wanting to do. Felt it was exclusionary, while Jim Brown was saying, no, this is about developing black talent in a field traditionally in Hollywood that shut out that kind of talent. And it eventually led to the implosion of Indigo Pictures about 35, 40 years ago. But I would argue they were way ahead of their time in terms of the idea of what they wanted to do to take on some of the unwritten rules of Hollywood.
Now, another part I found intriguing was the afterword, actually, because you sort of talked about Jim Brown as someone who needs to be noticed in a sense. And is that why you feel he surprised a lot of people by taking a supportive stance with Donald Trump? I
think Jim Brown is somebody, he's 83 years old, who's most comfortable when he's in the fray. Most comfortable when he is having a fight with others, most comfortable when he's in conflict, most comfortable when he's relevant. And so for him, I think supporting Donald Trump, part of that was this idea of saying, you know what, everybody from my generation is saying that Donald Trump is the devil incarnate. I'm going to take an antagonistic position and try to meet with Donald Trump and negotiate with Donald Trump in terms of the causes that I feel strongly about, namely in private investment in black communities. Now, whether or not Jim Brown is successful in that, whether or not this is a venture that will bear any fruit, I mean, that's something that history will tell. But I just find it very fascinating that if you look at some of the people from Jim Brown's time, from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Dr. Harry Edwards to Spike Lee, who directed a documentary about Jim Brown, they've all taken very strong stances against Donald Trump, and Jim Brown has basically looked at them and said, hey, I'm taking the other side, and if you don't like it, you can, take a leap.
Now, I also want to touch on some other things because you do a lot of work, and one of the other books you co-authored was with the Eagles' Michael Bennett, Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. Recently, his hearing was delayed in the case where he was alleged to have injured an elderly woman, and it was delayed because they haven't brought forth the evidence yet. Do you know anything about that case? What's going on?
I mean, what I know about the case from talking to Michael is that this case is, it feels very politically motivated against Michael Bennett. I mean, these are charges that were brought against him for something that allegedly happened 18 months earlier, and the investigation was only started after Michael Bennett came out with statements against the Las Vegas Police Department for being wrongly detained way back last fall before the start of the NFL season. So there's something about it that feels very politically motivated. They made Michael walk through the courtroom in handcuffs, and now it's a question of whether or not they're even going to go forward and press charges, which we'll find out to see what happens there. But I mean, it's very upsetting top to bottom. They brought the charges right before our book came out, 18 months after the fact. So there's a lot about it that, to me and to others, just stunk to high heaven. I think Michael Bennett is a very strong, proud, outspoken person and an athlete. And I think we've seen historically the way athletes who use their hyper-exalted, brought to you by Nike platform to speak out on social causes, they do get targeted in our society.
Now, you cover that intersection of sports and politics very well. Now, in the NBA, it doesn't seem to be as much brushed back, right? LeBron James speaks out publicly, Steph Curry, whomever. But in the NFL, there does seem to be that blowback. Most notably, of course, Colin Kaepernick still not having a job. Why do you think the NFL as a league seems to have such a hang-up with the players speaking out or taking any stances?
Oh, I think it starts with at the top with the leadership of the two commissioners, Adam Silver and Roger Goodell. Adam Silver has been very proactive in supporting players who speak out politically and in working, this is very important, with the Players Union, with Michelle Roberts at the NBPA. And I think this has created an atmosphere in the NBA where players don't feel like they need to rebel against the very structures of the league, particularly the protocol during the national anthem, to even be heard. The NFL is a very different kind of league. Players joke that NFL stands for not for long. They're told to keep their helmets on the field. They're told to basically be moving pieces of equipment in the field of play, and the average career is only 3.5 years. And so many players have felt compelled to speak out in recent years, particularly with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and much more access on social media to some of these cases of police violence and police brutality. And they feel like there's no avenue for them to do that in the National Football League. And I think it was out of that pressure cooker that actually protesting racial inequality during the anthem developed and then spread, and why it was so much more than just Colin Kaepernick. But I think what the owners have done is they've taken Colin Kaepernick and tried to turn him into kind of a ghost story, a cautionary tale. And they're doing the same thing right now, I feel like, with Eric Reed, which is why the NFL Players Association is bringing forward a grievance procedure against the NFL for keeping Eric Reed off the field. And it's this idea of wanting this whisper in players' ears that, hey, we can take this away from you at any time.
He's Dave ZIRIN. He is the editor of The Nation, host of the Edge of Sports podcast, and the author of Jim Brown, Last Man Standing. The NBA announced the 3 finalists for Coach of the Year: Brad Stevens, Quinn Snyder, and Dwayne Casey, who was promptly acknowledged by the Toronto Raptors Twitter account saying, "Congrats, Coach." Awkward much?
Did someone forget to tell the head of social media with the Raptors that their coach was fired? I mean, not only did he congratulate the former coach, he called him coach too, which is pretty interesting. The social media guys, you never know where they are in the building sometimes. They may be separate from operations, and someone forgot to pass the word along to this guy. I hope whoever this guy or woman is doesn't have the same fate as Dwayne Casey after that tweet.
Well, there's always some bitterness if you have the kind of season Casey had and then you're fired, but it did seem like they left on good terms. He wrote a glowing note to Canada afterwards, and maybe it's the Raptors returning the favor saying, we still appreciated what you did for us. We appreciate you watching. Yeah. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow, unless we suffer the fate of Dwayne Casey. In the meantime, check out SI Now Live on Twitter. Awkward.